Hello, I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. Joining me today is Michael Scott Phillips, author of Quite Fantastic: The Avengers for Modern Viewers, the Grande Marque Edition. And this is not the Avengers involving Tony Stark or Captain America. This is the Avengers featuring John Steed and Emma Peel, my favorite TV show of all time. So let's get into this while my wife is still listening.
A&E now returns to The Avengers.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm great. So I'm delighted to have a fellow Southerner joining me. I'm from South Carolina. You're from Georgia. A fellow Southerner joining me to discuss our mutual joy of a almost 60-year-old British TV series, The Avengers. And can you tell me about your particular interest and what inspired you to write this book?
I've always been an Avengers fan ever since I was a teenager. I've always said that Doctor Who was my gateway into British cult television, my gateway drug. So in the 1980s, I mean, it was the PBS station in Georgia. It just showed virtually everything British that was cult. So you had Doctor Who, you had Monty Python, you had the Avengers, you had Blake Seven, you had The Prisoner, all kinds of stuff. So I was not a big fan of 80s television, American 80s television at the time. A lot of people see it as a classic era now, but it wasn't really my thing. So that was really, my whole TV thing at the time was watching PBS and watching all these old British shows that were in syndication. So I became a fan of the Avengers. I guess it was about a late 1980s or something, maybe 86, 87. And it just seemed like there were several renaissances over the coming years. There was another one in 1990 when, I don't know if you remember this, but A&E showed all the Honor Blackman episodes for the first time. So that was the second sort of period of interest for me. And then the third was when the big theatrical release came out in 1998. Mm-hmm. And then the DVDs started coming out from A&E, of the series. So it was around that period, the late 90s, I started writing a website, which was intended to review all the episodes, because we were kind of watching a lot of them for the first time, or the first time in a long time. And so we had this website. It was called Quite Fantastic: The Avengers. I think it was called Quite Fantastic Avengers Website Limited is what I called it originally. Very long, goofy name, but anyway.
I was a fan of the website, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people still remember it. So that's where it all started, and then for various reasons, it sort of got dropped before I managed to review all the episodes, and I was looking for something that I wanted to collate into a book around 2018. And I thought, well, I've got all these old reviews. I can just, easily put them together and do a little editing and it'll make a book. But, in the end, I ended up basically redoing everything because my opinions had changed. My writing was better, and I just felt like I could do a better job. So I ended up rewatching every episode and re-reviewing everything. And that's how the book came about.
And you talk about it being for the modern viewer, because this is going into the 60th anniversary of Diana Rigg starting filming for the show. I think she started in December of 1964, and 1965 was the first season of hers. That seems like an incredibly long. I mean, when you and I were starting to watch it, I did the math. That was like someone now, a 16-year-old now, watching old episodes of X-Files. I think X-Files would have been even older now. And so, but here, a 60-year-old TV show, yet, I don't think, just for my middle-aged nostalgia, when I watch it, I think it still holds up quite well. And so what are your thoughts on that, and how you introduce this to, again, using your title, A Modern Lens?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, it's an unusual show in that it has survived the test of time much better than many shows from the 1960s. I think one of the reasons why is it just had a very high production standard for its day. I mean, even
Mhm.
if you like put it up against the top-notch, highly budgeted productions out of America at the time, it holds up very well. I mean, especially when you start getting into the color film era. They were actually shooting. Basically, what happened is, I talk about this a lot in the book. They were trying to break into American TV prime time almost from the beginning that Fennell and Clemens took over in 1964. That was their aim almost from the beginning. They wanted to be, a fall premiere in prime time on U.S. TV, and that had never happened with a British show before. This would have been the first time. Now, there have been other shows like, say, Danger Man, The Saint, The Prisoner later on that got into American TV and were very popular, but they were always as a mid-season replacement show or a summer replacement show. They were never in prime time. They were never in as a fall debut. So they aimed high from the very beginning, the Avengers. And this
Yeah.
you gotta think about this. This came from being like a videotaped show. This
Mhm.
was a show that had the same production values as William Hartnell era Doctor Who.
You
Yeah,
talk to folks and they will be like, it's hard to connect with audiences of modern folks about
right,
Doctor Who or say Dark Shadow, shows I like from that period,
right,
because they're used to a certain level of production values. And I think the
right.
Avengers, especially the Emma Peel seasons, look like TV shows now. I think. I mean, even in
Yeah,
black and white, what might be some people might find old fashioned, I think it's still beautifully shot, and a lot of location footage and whatever. It really holds up.
yeah, absolutely. And maybe they had a little more artistry from the beginning, but then it really comes out in the film era, and it starts to
Mhm.
look very film noir. It looks like the films of the day, really.
Mhm.
When I look at it, I compare it to like a lot of the British cinema that was coming out at the time. And one of the reasons for this was because a lot of the directors that were working on the show that they were pulling them in from the British film industry, which was in a kind of crisis and was kind of falling apart. It wasn't being as successful as it had in the past. And so they had all these film directors that were essentially out of work. And so a way for them to get more work was to move into television. And so there was you know, that was all Albert Finnell's idea. He
Mhm.
was he was the guy that had the film background amongst the two producers, and so he was bringing in a lot of really talented film directors that boosted the image of the show enormously. So that's one of the reasons why it's held up so well, because very high production standards for the day
Mhm.
television.
Um, and for a lot of shows that its growth, if you think about, again, use the X-Files as an example, a show where there's like a clear, here's the pilot, and the pilot sort of resembles what the show would become. That's not actually what happened with the Avengers. It was sort of a series of, for those first three seasons, growth and change. And
Hmm.
it originally wasn't a male and female partner, and his partner
Right.
was a man. And those, Kathy Gale, played by Honor Blackman, that exploded. That was huge in London at the time. They even had
Oh
recorded
yeah.
a novelty hit um, song, which I think Kinky Boots, or I think was
Yeah,
it was
Kinky
it.
Boots and Let's Stay Together, or what was
Let's
I,
keep it
I don't know.
friendly.
As
Let's
I
keep,
Let's keep
yeah.
it friendly. That's the one. Yeah, exactly. I always like to say it's 281,000 words. I can't keep track of them all. It's no way. I like to say, like quote Sean Connery. I wrote it down so I wouldn't have to remember. Remember that line from
Yeah,
Indiana
exactly.
Jones?
I love that.
So
Um,
let's keep
but
it
yeah,
friendly.
so it was at a peak of popularity, and sort of put that in context, and you do sort of in documenting the history of the book, that when Honor Blackman left to go do James Bond. She played Pussy Galore in Goldfinger, which was
Right.
huge at the time. There is a sense of, okay, well, what happens now? And then they go to film, but the idea that you hit this lightning in a bottle, that you get Diana Rigg as Emma Peel, which I think is one of the greatest TV characters ever. Um, and she wasn't the first choice. It was Elizabeth Shepard, right?
Right. Elizabeth Shepard. Yeah.
And she did not work out, and she just didn't have the chemistry, or wasn't quite what it's. There's many different theories as to why she was eventually let go after filming a couple episodes.
I mean, I like to listen to both sides. She says she didn't feel like her ideas were listened to.
Mm,
Maybe there was a little bit of sexism involved, and they weren't, you know, interested in her ideas. They just wanted someone to read the lines like they wanted or whatever. But then you listen to the other side, and you listen to the director that worked on the first episode that she worked on, and he was saying that she thought that the character of Emma Peel could just look at her watch, and because it was a chronometer or something, it would just have the answers, and she'd just be able to look at her watch and say, "Well, the answer is so and so," and she didn't seem to understand that didn't really work as a visual thing, or it didn't even make any sense. I don't even know what kind of watch they would be talking about. What kind of watch did you have in the 1960s that would give any answer
yeah.
you had, like Google or something? But anyway,
Yes, the pre-Apple Watch, I guess, maybe.
I
Uh,
suppose I don't know what she was thinking, if that is really what happened, but that's what. Now I've forgotten his name. I have to look it up in my own
no,
book.
no.
Isn't
People
that
should buy
amazing?
the book. They can buy the book and find these
Yeah,
answers.
it's like they can
So,
buy the book. But anyway,
um,
the point is that it didn't work out, possibly for that reason, and possibly because she just didn't have chemistry or
yeah.
whatever.
Well, they seem to went bolder. She's, again, for folks who aren't as into the Avengers as perhaps you and I are. She's Elizabeth Shepard's blonde, or was
Right.
blonde at the time. Honor Blackman was blonde. You could see how, again, the sort of shadow of Kathy Gale was there, and then
Mhm.
you were able to really go in such a different direction with Emma Peel. The Murder Market is the first one that she did. It's y- you give it sort of a mixed review. It's interesting to me because you see her developing the Emma Peel character. It's not quite there. She's great in it because I think Dinah Rigg is excellent in everything. But
Okay.
what are your thoughts on that episode, that first one in that new
I feel
era?
like I feel like Diana Rigg, anyway, was still finding herself in that
Mhm.
episode. It doesn't quite feel like the Diana Rigg we see later. Whereas if you see the one she filmed, I think second after that, The Town of No Return, where they went back and they redid all the scenes with Emma Peel in them and replaced Elizabeth Shepard's performance. In that, she feels like she just fits right in, and it's
Mhm.
totally Emma Peel that we know right from the beginning, and that shows how quickly she dialed it in. It only took her like an episode and a half to really get it, but I don't really see it during the Murder Market. It just seems a little bit like it's a little bit
Yeah.
nebulous type thing. It still feels a little bit like Kathy Gale, and a little bit like she's just trying to find herself. And I think she has like, I think I remember putting in the book that she has kind of like a ethical debate with Steed at one point. Is that another
Yes,
episode?
in some of the early episodes, um, they do that because Kathy Gale and Steed had a much more antagonistic relationship, which was
Yeah.
sort of, again, itself revelatory in what you would later see in shows, I would say, like Moonlighting or others, where there's sort of that will they or won't they tension. They kind of
Mm.
don't like each other, but then it becomes romantic, and Steve was much more uh perhaps
A little
sexually
more.
overt with Kathy Gale, whereas Steed and Mrs. Peel, their relationship was much friendlier and
Right.
intimate than
Intimate, good word.
Gale.
Yeah.
And those but early episodes, I would say, like in filming order, Murder Market, slightly the Masterminds, less so. I think definitely Dollar Deadly Number, just one of my personal favorites.
Love that.
They do have those. They go at each other at a point where you sort of see where, oh yeah, this could have been a Kathy Gale script, because there's that Kathy Gale moment of kind of like, I didn't want to actually be helping you. You kind of wrote me in, type of thing, which
Right.
would happen a
Right.
lot. And eventually that shifted to where they were sort of
Well,
kind of
with
best
Dial a
friends
Deadly
going on
Number,
adventures.
it could have been because it was written by Roger Marshall, and he was still in that mindset of, how the previous seasons had gone, still in more of a hard boiled spy fiction kind of
Mm,
mindset. And later on, he sort of bristled with the changes that were coming, the kind of silly, campy hijinks that came later. And eventually he had a falling out with the production. But in that episode, which is brilliantly written in my opinion,
mm.
Dial a Number, um, you can see all the typical. You could almost take that episode and shoot it with Kathy Gale, and it would work just fine.
Oh yeah,
Need to. I mean, it feels the same as a third season episode. It's just shot with superior production
yeah,
standards and has them appeal. So
yeah. There's quite a few Kathy Gale episodes I love that when watching El Dollar Number, I think that of, oh, if only this episode had those production values, because it's really good, but it's kind of held back a bit by, I mean, they were shooting live on tape, which is
right.
like, like almost like a stage play. Um, but yeah, Daily Number is really good. Has a sci-fi element of the bleepers and so forth.
Which really wasn't that far off, really.
Oh no, absolutely. And which, within a same kind of season or production block, you'd later get um Man Eater of Surrey Green, which literally aliens from outer space, which I adore, but it's so different. It's so like in a different field of like what's possible and plausible.
Right.
You comment on how there's a perhaps a, a homage to that episode in a Doctor Who story.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a little more than homage, in my opinion, but
That's
it's got
Seeds of
everything.
Doom.
It's
Yeah.
got everything. Yeah, it's a bit. That is a bit of a weird one. I don't know what to think about that. But when I watch the two of them side by side, I'm like, he had to have been thinking of this episode. He had to have been thinking of the Man Eater of Surrey Green when he wrote the Seeds of Doom, which is the Doctor Who episode. I can't
It's
imagine
yeah.
anybody not thinking of it, especially when they worked on the show. They
Exactly. And it's the
Robert Bankston worked on that season of the Avengers.
yeah,
You
you
know,
had to have seen it and thought, okay, killer plants, I got you. We'll do our own little version of that. Um yeah, it's and that sort of that diversity of content makes it so when I talk to Avengers fans, there are folks who have very different ideas of what their favorite episodes are. I think Too Many Christmas Trees tends to, that sort of kind of fans sort of align around that as sort of liking it, but there's there's so much you can enjoy. I think it's a good thing, right? Like, you don't have to agree. It's just like that everyone agrees that there's a lot to appreciate. Obviously their book title, quite fantastic, comes from the final black and white episode, Honey for the Prince, which is
right?
another one that's fun, but also um again campier. Like, again, you see that edge of where it's right, of where it's potentially a fifth season episode and how things are, as opposed to the early episodes. So again, watching in order, a filming
Right.
order, makes you kind of, it pops out as like, oh, here's how this show is changing and what people um
The girl
Might
from
find
Monster.
compelling. The girl
The
to
girl.
auntie definitely.
That's the transition point, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That's the first one that feels like a fifth season episode to me. And
absolutely. It also because of the, I think, and there had been critics of the show who say like, oh, you went from like, obviously there'd be high body counts as a spy show, so drama, but where it wasn't necessarily a joke, it would be like, but by that point, and we see much more of that in the fifth season, the reaction to death was almost as if everyone knows it's a TV show and we're just having fun with this. This people are dying, which is why I think when they do sort of pull back from that in the fifth season, when they come back, because it's sort of like, not to get into that debate about the fifth season being almost two, they start doing much more serious ones towards the end, and Murdersville is one where the people who die, the show presents it that you feel it. Like, Emma Peel is hurt that her friend has died, and it's not like done in the sort of campy, jokey way that we sort of see in Girl from Auntie, which again is one of those that I just absolutely adore because it's hilarious.
yes,
But yeah, it's just that it's those transitions. What are some of the formulas that appeal to you in an Avengers episode? Are there certain things that you look for?
I love the witty banter, probably most of all, and I
Mhm.
think that is a feature that goes all the way back to the beginning of the show. It's just a matter of intensity or concentration of it. I think it reaches a kind of peak in the fourth and fifth seasons, and then it probably because just the chemistry between Diana Rigg and Patrick Macnee was so good, and because Diana Rigg is so good at that. She
Mhm.
was so good at that witty banter and just delivering a line with just so much nuance to it. She could put a little bit of an aristocracy into the most humorous line, or she could put a little bit of humor into the most serious line. She was extremely good at the subtlety and the subtlety of her expressions too.
Oh yeah.
Like that
Um,
that opening scene in the town of no return where you can literally just see her smile behind the mask, and how she's she loves Steve, but she's kind of holding back. She doesn't want him to know it. So there's just this kind of slightly wry smile. She's amused by him even though she's also annoyed by him to some
mhm.
degree.
Yeah,
And
she balances that so well, and that makes the relationship really work between them to where, yeah, you kind of want to go on any adventure with them. So no matter what the circumstances, um, I always like the ones where they are sort of playing a role. I think it's the theatricality in me. I like where they're pretending they're someone they're not. Certain
right,
episodes later in the Thorson episodes, especially, they sometimes will write Steed and his partner as almost no different from a cop. So they come in and investigate
right,
something. But I always like the ones where it's just sort of, no, 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 my investigation is just to kind of come in and pretend that I'm want to get married at this marriage bureau and stuff like that. And I'm going to pretend
right.
that I'm someone. And I think that's an aspect of the show that really works well. Um, you talked about the sort of cinematic aspect of the fourth season. Um, I asked you about the first episode that aired in America in 1966, the Cybernauts, which has one of my favorite intros ever. It's like,
It's classic.
Emergency? Emergency? Which service do you require? Hello? Caller?
and the villain, played by Michael Gow, who Alfred in the 1989 Batman. He
Yep.
also plays a villain in the fifth season. Um,
Dr. Strong, yeah.
yeah, Clement Armstrong. It is, um, yeah, just a really, really good episode, and I think to me, sort of that peak of it, where it's funny but serious. Again, it's not camp. There's not much camp in that. It's like pretty
Right.
straightforward, serious, but also wry. What are your thoughts on that episode?
I think it's a wonderful episode. I think it's I in my review I wrote that it's solid adventure television. It doesn't really fit into any category. It's both spy, it's both science fiction. In some ways, the science fiction is slightly dated. I don't think
Mm,
anybody would look at it now and think this is what people are worried about. Um, Maybe more in an AI sense,
yeah.
people would be worried about it, but they're not worried about automation. You know, they're not worried about machines doing jobs and building things and that sort of thing. So
Mm,
it just it feels like its own little world in a way. You
yeah.
know, you've got this world of the Avengers where these things were possible in the 1960s. And it's very exciting too. That opening is one of the most exciting openings in really any television that I can think of. I mean, it's very, uh, it's quite thrilling, really. You know,
The I think would go into that fear of automation, but also it's interesting that that is a theme. I mean, because it's the '60s, and to me, sometimes I wouldn't say it's dated. I say it's interesting to sort of as a document of what people were concerned about in the times. You say
right?
with automation, that theme later comes up in the house that Jack built when the villain is someone who believes that computers are superior to people, who plans to automate, and Emma Peel had fired him, um, and he wants revenge. And of course, Steed, of course, challenges the concept of automation. Of course, outsmarts the the robots in the Cybernauts. If I could ask you also about the house that Jack built, that I was watching that recently during Jodie Whittaker's run as Doctor Who, and it's interesting to see that of like again Dinah Rigg. Like, oh right, she could have been a female doctor because in that episode, like she's the way she's, especially in the modern Doctor Who, she's dashing, she's adventurous, but she's also so brilliant and able to think through problems and solve things. And so that particular episode is sort of a showcase for that character, you know, in the mid '60s, which is so impressive. Like she's um for a female character, I would think of that period.
Right. I mean, I think it's a tour de force for her. I mean, and she's got to do a lot in that episode, and she's got to do a lot with very little, if you think about
Mhm.
it, because she doesn't have hardly any lines. You know, so it's all about the frustration she displays on her face. Whether she's looking hopeful, whether she's looking fearful, whether she's uncertain or confident or whatever, and it all plays on her face. And she only has this insane escape convict to talk to, and then only briefly. So it's a lot of work for her, and I think she does a bang up job. I mean, she's clicking on all four cylinders there, and yeah, I mean, it just shows her range. She had tremendous range as an actor.
Absolutely. Um, you know, I think it's sort of common. It's interesting also because the breadth of, if you think again, talking about modern, what people are used to sort of in the streaming era and with sort of 10 episode seasons, they filmed about 51 episodes of Steed and Mrs. Peel. So it's kind of
Right,
what would be equivalent of 5 seasons of a streamer now. So there's a lot of content,
right.
for folks to appreciate her, despite there being only technically 2 seasons. And then Linda Thorson filmed, I think, more than
Really.
33 episodes. With the time we have left, I'd love to ask you about the 7 seasons because that had been such a debate online when I was much younger. And yes, it just seemed sort of obvious that what is considered the fifth season is really two, just one
Right.
16 episode and one 8 episode. Not to get too inside baseball, but like I think Return of the Cybernauts is sort of by our standards, obviously a season opener. You have Peter Cushing, you have whatever. It's like clearly meant to be, and there'd be an extended break between that and the last episode, Who's Who. So and there's a lot of format changes that you also note in the book as well, right?
Yeah,
Between
there
those
are a lot.
two.
I mean, well, like for example, I mean, they get rid of the taglines, they get rid of the Mrs. Peel where needed scenes. I think overall there's a general tone change. I think you've
Mhm.
got basically 3 episodes that kind of have science fiction elements to them, but none of them are done with the same level of campiness or zaniness that you get out of the fifth season. They're all done much more straight, much less, comedically. Um, I don't. I have no. You know, a lot of people have said that those 3 episodes showed that Fennel and Clemens was trying to stick to their formula and they weren't willing to change. But I see a lot of difference between them and the prior season, just in the tone and the way they're done. And even if
Mhm.
you get into like the fashion commentary, like you can see the fashion that they had introduced for the cast running out towards the end of the fifth season, and suddenly you get Return of the Cybernauts, and there's this slew of debuts coming out,
Mhm.
new outfits for Emma Peel and everything. And there's just this general sense that they're starting up a new season, even if it was only a few weeks in between, in
Mhm.
terms of shooting, because I think it was like 6 weeks, a
Yeah.
6 week break. But the most important aspect of it to me, and the reason why I separate them out, is because but the show was basically influenced by American funding from the first Emma Peel season on, because what they were always trying to go for that season premiere on in prime time on in America, but they were only getting orders of 15 to 16 episodes a season from ABC in America. So that's all they could produce because it was a very expensive show. They had to know they had that money coming in order to make the episodes. They were using 2 and 3 um, production crews. They had different production units operating all at the same time, which is like a film set.
Mhm.
And whereas originally, the fourth season was shot with only one production unit. So they were having to expand production to keep up with the demand just to make 16 episodes to the standard needed for American television. And for that, they needed to have that money coming in on a regular basis. So when they stopped in um, the, the spring of 1967, they were waiting to see what the ratings were going to be in that, what was essentially the second season in America, which was the first 16 Diana Rigg episodes. They wanted to see what the ABC in America wanted to see what the ratings were like before they ordered anymore. And so the production in the UK had to shut down and wait to find out what they were going to say. Fortunately, they said, yeah, we love it. The ratings were good. We want another 16 episodes. And that's when they started filming again. And then those episodes weren't shown in America until the following winter, like January of '68, and they weren't
Mhm.
shown in the UK until the like September of '67. So there's a long gap there between, in terms of airing, whether you're looking at US or the UK. There's a long gap. There's at least 5.5 months.
And the final Emma Peel episode, the Forget Me Not, it was sort of filmed in a weird order, correct? Like
Right.
they started, she didn't have a proper goodbye, and they brought her back. I've heard different stories about that, but
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a muddle. I don't think anybody knows exactly what happened, but I believe they were either in production or in pre-production when they decided to fire Fennel and Clemens and replace them with John Bryce, who had been the producer in season 3, and that created a whole shakedown throughout the whole production. And it's just bizarre. In retrospect, it's bizarre to think that they did this because, the show was a huge success. It was getting orders from America. They were in the middle of trying to produce another season of 16 episodes, and that's the moment when they say, we got to change everything. It really doesn't make any sense in retrospect. But they
Yeah.
decided that since Diana Rigg had already said she wanted to leave the show at the end of her contract, that they would just reset everything. And so they dismissed her, and I think she shot some scenes on the Forget Me Not by then, but I'm not sure. I just know that they were in some form of production on it. And then they started on this whirlwind tour to try to find a replacement for Diana Rigg, and eventually found Linda Thorson. And then they filmed part of 3 episodes with her, with John Bryce as the producer. And the executives looked at them and said, these aren't very good.
And they are right.
And they were right. And so then they just completely reversed course. And they brought back Fennel and Clemens and said, please, please, please save our show, because they're deadlines, I mean, like literally they did this in, this would have been going down in like late November, early December. And the new season's supposed to debut in January on ABC in America. So like this is last minute stuff here. So Fennel and Clemens come back and they start filming again. And the first thing they think to do is to bring Diana Rigg back so they can do a proper farewell, because she was supposed to have I think it was another 3 episodes, if I remember rightly. She had 3 more, I think, in her contract, but they just missed her before the end of her contract. Just, it
wise.
So they brought her back and gave her a proper farewell. So we can't really say whether she was slated to have a proper farewell before then. She might have been scheduled. Fennel and Clemens had that in their minds, that her 10th and final episode in that contract would have been a farewell, but we just don't know. But so they decided to do that for the Forget Me Not, and finished it off. And they had to somehow salvage the material that John Bryce had already shot, which was a tough call there, very difficult task. And then they had to basically get the batch of episodes up to 15 so they could satisfy the order for America. And they somehow managed to do it, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. But that's another reason why I don't like watching that season in production order, because the quality of those episodes is a little bit variable.
Yes, it's a bit of a slog in that. It's more of if you want to try to Linda Thorson really try to give her due, but otherwise, yes, you're right. Those first few episodes are they aren't great.
All over the place too. It's like they didn't know what they wanted from her at first, and I think that's a reason why she was not as popular. One of the reasons, anyway, is because you don't really dial into her character until they get through this mad rush to get this first production block done. And then they move into the next production block of the Tara King episodes. And then they kind of start to hone in on her character and figure out.
And I've made this observation as a fan of Doctor Who. It felt as if they were, and again, this has nothing to do with Linda Thorson, but they were less writing someone at the level of Kathy Gale or Diana Rigg, and they seemed as if they were writing a Doctor Who companion of that, who would be a great Doctor Who companion, probably by those standards of the time. But she wasn't, as equal. It was sort of like she was young. Right. They were presenting her as sort of younger and not quite at the same level. And that in a way created a sort of sense of Steed was more of a father figure, which I think had its challenges for the character. That's unfortunate. They had in America, the intro for the 4th season that was only in America was they described Emma Peel as a talented amateur, even though she's brilliant. Um, and whereas she actually felt more like a trained agent, then they said, okay, well, Tara King's a trained agent who, like, perhaps if she had been a very talented amateur with some level of expertise, it would come across better. But instead, it was sort of like they made the spies all sort of like prep school kind of almost buffoons compared to Steed, which that was only my take. It just felt like it was not as kind of mysterious and cool as the
Right.
fourth and fifth
To be
seasons. How they
fair,
treated.
she was a freshly trained agent. She had just
Yes.
completed her training, so she was very green, but she was officially trained. Yeah, it's the whole talented amateur thing is kind of happening off camera anyway. I think
Yeah.
that was always just the producer's sort of guideline for what the characters were going to be. It goes back to Dr. Keel, really, but with Honor Blackman and Diana Rigg, it was sort of just an unsaid thing. But they were always meant to be extremely talented from the beginning, and they clearly were. And I think Linda Thorson had, she had a tough task ahead of her. She was pretty much straight out of drama school. Um, and, she was following two very successful older actresses or more experienced actresses that had, really established themselves very well as being, obviously very connected with the show. And she had a tough job ahead of her. And I think taking all that into consideration, I think she did a fine job. She
Oh yeah.
she did.
I like her quite a bit.
Yeah, and there are some
Um,
very very good episodes in that season.
yeah, I was
Some
about to ask you, what are some in that season you would recommend to folks? And again, people should buy your book, but while I have you here.
right. Well, I really like the interrogators. They keep killing Steed. Love all. Love all is the brilliant one. Game is very good. The super secret cipher snatch. Those are all very good episodes. Those I would put those scripts up against anything in the Emma Peel era, regardless of whether they match the wittiness or the chemistry between the characters or not. They're just damn good scripts, and
Hmm.
they hold up. So those are all very good. There's several more I would recommend, but there's also some that are quite bad. Really, I mean, I personally, in my opinion, they are anyway. But overall, I
Yes.
think it's a pretty strong season. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as maybe its reputation.
Thank you so much for talking to me about the Avengers in this book. I'm going to put up the overlay of it again. Quite fantastic. Um, Updated. I think you'd originally written a few years ago. Now it's been updated, recently released. So new stuff to check out. And yeah,
The
thank.
Grande Marque Edition.
Yes, that's really cool. And yeah, anything else you'd like to add about the show, or people who are thinking of checking out the show for the first time? Is there like a episode you'd say, hey, try this? Are there a couple you would
There's,
say try?
there's actually a new section in the book about that. Where do new viewers start? And
Mhm.
it's it's a vexed question, as I say. It's a difficult one. Probably my best guess would be for most people just start with the filmed era and M appeal. That's probably the easiest way. That's probably how most people will see it anyway, because those are the ones that get syndicated the most. So probably start with the filmed era, and if you decide you really like the show a lot, then you can go back and brave some of those videotaped episodes, and hopefully the Honor Blackman era will do it for you as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Michael, and everyone. Like, share, subscribe. Check out Michael's book, quite fantastic. And links will be below and on the Substack. And we'll check you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.
Which way you point that, I'm frightened of folks. Steve! bit on the dry side.
but a very adaptable wine.